Jake Miller had seen some crazy things in his life, but watching a middle-aged woman in a power suit sip coffee from a mug that literally said HOA Queen while her rusted minivan sat parked in his driveway was a new level of absurdity. He stood there, hands on his hips, staring at the woman who had made it her life's mission to torment him since the day he moved in. Karen, the self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood, gave him a smug smile, took another sip, and casually scrolled through her phone like she hadn't just hijacked his property. "Karen, you're blocking my driveway," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "No, I'm teaching you a lesson," she replied, not even bothering to look up. Jake took a deep breath. He had dealt with stubborn clients, overzealous bosses, and even the occasional rogue raccoon in his garage. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the level of petty he was dealing with now. He had been in the neighborhood for exactly 3 months, and in that short time, Karen had fined him for having his garbage can out 3 minutes too early, accused his car of being an unapproved shade of blue, and once, in a moment that still made his blood boil, called the HOA board on him because his grass was 0.2 inches too tall. But this was something else. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Karen, move your car." She sighed dramatically, finally lowering her phone. "Jake, honey, I run the HOA. You should have read the fine print. This driveway? Technically, it's part of the community's easement zone, which means I can park here if necessary." He blinked. "Necessary? For what?" "For maintaining order," she said matter-of-factly. Jake took another deep breath and counted to 10. Then to 20. Then to 50, because he was dangerously close to throwing her coffee into the bushes. "If you don't move your car, I'm calling the police." Karen gave him a look of exaggerated pity. "Oh, sweetie, go ahead. My husband's a lawyer. Let's see how that works out for you." That did it. He pulled out his phone, dialed the non-emergency police number, and gave the dispatcher a brief explanation of the situation. To his complete lack of surprise, when the officer showed up, Karen turned on the crocodile tears and spun a story so ridiculous that even Jake had to admire her creativity. "He's harassing me," she sniffled. "I felt so unsafe, I had no choice but to park here. I was shaking." The officer, looking entirely uninterested, glanced between them. "Ma'am, do you have any actual proof of a threat?" Karen gasped as if deeply offended. He looked at me aggressively. Jake ran a hand down his face. "She's blocking my driveway." The officer sighed, obviously wishing he had chosen a different career path. "Sir, this is a civil matter. Take it up with the HOA." Karen smirked. "Thank you, officer. I knew you'd understand." Jake watched the officer leave, then turned back to her. "You're really going to do this?" She tilted her head. "Oh, honey. I already did." That night, Jake sat in his home office, staring at his laptop screen, trying to figure out what kind of medieval curse had landed him in this situation. He could fight her through the HOA, but that could take months. He could try towing her car, but Karen had friends on the board, and that would just escalate things further. He needed something big. Something undeniable. Something that would take the entire game board and flip it over. And then, at exactly 2:37 a.m., he found it. The loophole. He scrolled through the county's zoning laws, rubbing his temples as he read through paragraph after paragraph of legal jargon, and then, there it was. A single line that changed everything. Private residential driveways may be repurposed as personal helipads upon obtaining appropriate permits, at which point they will be considered aviation property and subject to FAA regulations rather than local HOA ordinances. Jake leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. Then, very slowly, a grin stretched across his face. Karen wanted to play legal warfare? Fine. He'd play. The next morning, Jake was up at sunrise, standing in line at the local zoning office with a fresh cup of coffee and the kind of grin that made people nervous. By noon, he had the application paperwork filled out, notarized, and officially submitted. Within 48 hours, an inspector came to survey the property. And by the end of the week, it was official. His driveway was no longer a driveway. It was a legally registered, FAA-compliant private helipad. Jake waited until the official paperwork arrived in the mail before making his next move. He walked outside, glanced at Karen's car, still smugly parked in his driveway, and then carefully, methodically, started laying out the new markings. Bright yellow paint, large block letters, the whole deal. When Karen finally came outside to investigate, her jaw nearly hit the floor. "What are you doing?" she screeched. Jake didn't even look up. "Oh, just repainting my helipad." Her eye twitched. "Your what?" "My helipad." He straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You see, I found a fun little loophole in the county's zoning laws. My driveway isn't a driveway anymore. It's FAA-regulated aviation property." Karen blinked. Once, twice. Then she let out a shrill laugh. "This is a joke." "Nope." He pulled the official paperwork from his pocket and handed it to her. "It's legally binding." She scanned the document, her face slowly turning redder with every line. This isn't possible," she whispered. "Oh, it is," he said cheerfully. Karen's hands shook. "You can't just—" "Oh, but I did," he interrupted. "And here's the fun part, Karen. HOA rules? They don't apply to aviation zones." For the first time since he had moved in, Karen looked genuinely speechless. Then, in an act of sheer desperation, she did the most Karen thing possible. She grabbed a bucket of water from her porch and dumped it all over his fresh helipad markings. Jake stared at the now smeared paint, then slowly looked up at her. "You just destroyed federal aviation markings." Karen paled. "That's not." Jake pulled out his phone and held up the screen. The security camera feed showed everything crystal clear. Karen let out a choked laugh, shaking her head. "You wouldn't." "Oh, I absolutely would," he said, grinning. "And I'm thinking, maybe it's time I make a phone call." For the first time since he had moved in, Jake saw something incredible. Karen was terrified. The zoning office clerk blinked at Jake, then at the paperwork in her hands, then back at Jake. "You're telling me you turned your driveway into a private helipad?" she asked, as if she were struggling to comprehend reality. Jake smiled and nodded. "Yep. All legal. All documented. The FAA has jurisdiction now." The clerk let out a slow whistle and stamped the final approval onto his forms. "Well, that's a first." Jake took the paperwork and walked out of the office feeling like a king. He had won the first battle, but he knew the war was far from over. Karen wasn't the type to back down quietly. She was like a cornered raccoon, desperate, unpredictable, and probably rabid. He wasn't wrong. That very evening, as he was admiring the fresh helipad markings, Karen stormed over, her phone clutched in one hand, her HOA clipboard in the other. "You think this is funny?" she hissed, waving the papers in his face. Jake tilted his head. "I think it's hilarious, actually." She inhaled sharply through her nose. "I spoke to the HOA board. We are officially filing a complaint against you." Jake shrugged. "Go ahead." Her lips twitched. "And we are fining you." He crossed his arms. "For what?" "For violating the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood," she snapped. Your ridiculous helipad doesn't match the community standards." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Karen, FAA regulations override HOA rules. This isn't community property anymore. It's federally recognized aviation property." She shook her head furiously. "I don't care. I will fight this. I will not allow you to turn this peaceful neighborhood into a circus." Jake almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then he remembered the months of pettiness, the absurd fines, the way she had smirked every time she made his life harder. "Good luck with that," he said, walking back inside. Karen did not take that well. The next morning, she had rallied her loyal band of HOA minions. They stood outside his house with clipboards, snapping photos, whispering and taking notes like they were FBI agents investigating a high-profile crime scene. Jake watched from his window, sipping his coffee. He wondered how much time they had wasted on this nonsense instead of, say, actually improving the neighborhood. A few minutes later, Karen marched up to his porch and rang the doorbell. Jake took his time answering. "You are in violation of multiple HOA regulations," she declared the moment he opened the door. Jake yawned. "You said that yesterday." Karen's nostrils flared. "We have formally submitted a legal motion to have your so-called helipad removed." Jake chuckled. "Did you file it with the county zoning office?" Karen's smug expression faltered. "We filed it with the HOA." Jake grinned. So, nowhere that actually has authority over this." She faltered for a split second but quickly recovered. "The board will not allow this. We are taking this to the city council." Jake clapped his hands together. "Fantastic. Can't wait. Meanwhile, my first scheduled landing is happening this weekend." Karen's eye twitched. "You're bluffing." Jake pulled out his phone and showed her the email confirmation. "Nope. Just got clearance for a one-time private landing." Karen's face turned an interesting shade of purple. She turned on her heel and stormed off, furiously typing on her phone. By the next day, she had escalated things in the most Karen way possible. She called the local news. Jake was outside setting up a small seating area on his lawn when he saw the news van roll up. A reporter stepped out, adjusting her mic, while a cameraman followed. Karen, dressed like she was about to give a TED Talk on neighborhood tyranny, stepped in front of the camera with the enthusiasm of someone who had spent years waiting for this moment. "This man," she declared dramatically, "is destroying our community. He is turning our quiet, beautiful neighborhood into an airstrip for his own amusement." Jake sighed. He figured it was time to step in. He casually walked over, hands in his pockets, and smiled at the reporter. "You must be here about my FA-approved helipad?" The reporter turned to him, intrigued. "So, you admit it?" "Oh, absolutely," Jake said. "And I have all the legal documentation right here." He handed the papers over. The reporter skimmed through them, her eyebrows raising. Karen, noticing the shift in the conversation, hurried to regain control. "This is a mockery of the HOA's authority. He is violating multiple neighborhood policies." The reporter turned back to Jake. "And the HOA has no jurisdiction over this?" Jake shook his head. "None. Federal aviation law overrides HOA rules." Karen spluttered. "But it." The reporter, sensing gold, turned to the camera. "And there you have it, folks. A neighborhood dispute turned legal spectacle. A man turning his driveway into a helipad, and an HOA that can do nothing about it. Stay tuned." Karen was fuming. She stormed off before the interview could get any worse for her. Jake grinned to himself. He knew this wasn't over, but watching her squirm was deeply satisfying. He spent the next few days preparing for the big moment. The landing. The day arrived, and with it, an entire crowd of neighbors who had caught wind of the event. Some were excited, others curious, and a select few, Karen's loyalists, stood with arms crossed, watching in disapproval. Karen herself was front and center, her face a thundercloud of rage. Then came the sound. A deep, rumbling roar in the distance. The unmistakable thrum of rotor blades slicing through the air. People gasped. Cameras were raised. The helicopter came into view, circling once before descending. The sheer wind force sent leaves scattering, rattling windows. Karen was screaming something, but no one could hear her over the deafening noise. The helicopter touched down perfectly, right in the middle of Jake's freshly painted helipad. The pilot waved, gave Jake a thumbs up, and then, for added effect, popped open a soda and took a sip like it was just another Tuesday. Jake turned to Karen. "Still think it's not a helipad?" She was shaking with rage, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. This is illegal." Jake held up his phone. "Actually, it's all recorded and legal." Karen looked around, realizing for the first time that the entire neighborhood was watching. Phones were out. People were laughing. Some were even clapping. She let out a strangled sound and stormed off, shoving past people, her entire reign of terror unraveling in real time. Jake exhaled, watching her retreat. The battle was won. But he had a feeling the war wasn't over just yet. The neighborhood had never been this alive. Ever since the helicopter landed on Jake's driveway-turned-helipad, the entire block had turned into a buzzing hub of activity. People whispered about it at the local coffee shop, kids pointed at his house in awe, and even the usually indifferent neighbors had suddenly developed an interest in aviation laws. Karen, on the other hand, had gone full nuclear. She had been humiliated in front of the entire community, outmaneuvered in a way she had never imagined possible, and worst of all, she had no power to stop it. But she wasn't going down quietly. The very next morning, a letter from the HOA was taped to Jake's door, an official notice declaring that his helipad was in severe violation of community aesthetics and demanding its immediate removal. Jake laughed when he read it. It was a desperate move, and he knew it. He took a picture of the letter, attached the FAA approval documents, and emailed the entire HOA board with a subject line that simply read, "Nice try." Within an hour, he received a reply from one of the board members. "We did not approve this letter." Karen acted alone. Jake grinned. The cracks were starting to show. Later that afternoon, as he was watering his lawn, Karen stormed over, her face red with fury. "You think this is funny?" she spat. "I think it's hilarious," Jake replied, not bothering to hide his amusement. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You made a joke out of the HOA." Jake turned off the hose and looked at her. "Karen, you did that to yourself." Her nostrils flared. "You will regret this." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Are you threatening me?" Karen smiled, but it wasn't the smug, confident smile she usually wore. This one was different. "Let's just say you won't be laughing much longer." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement. Jake sighed. He knew she wasn't done. Not yet. The next few days were oddly quiet. No new HOA letters, no fines, no sudden rule changes. It was suspicious. Too suspicious. Then, on Friday evening, it happened. A man in a suit knocked on Jake's door. "Mr. Miller?" "Yep." The man adjusted his tie. "I'm here on behalf of Karen and the HOA legal team. We're filing a lawsuit against you." Jake blinked. "A lawsuit? For what?" "For disturbing the peace, illegal modifications to your property, and endangering the neighborhood," the man said, handing him a thick stack of legal papers. Jake took the papers and flipped through them. It was nonsense. All of it. "You do know that the FAA already cleared this, right?" The man gave a half-hearted shrug. "That's for a judge to decide." Jake leaned against the doorframe. "Karen put you up to this, didn't she?" "She's very determined," the man admitted. "But between you and me, this case has no legs. She just doesn't know when to quit." Jake chuckled. "Tell me about it." The man gave him a sympathetic look and walked away, leaving Jake standing there with a fresh pile of legal garbage. He knew Karen was hoping this would scare him into giving up. That wasn't going to happen. If she wanted a legal battle, she was about to get one. That night, Jake did his research. By morning, he had a counter-lawsuit ready. If Karen wanted to play dirty, he would play smarter. He filed for harassment, defamation, and illegal tampering with federal property. He also submitted the security footage of her destroying the helipad markings to the city attorney. It didn't take long for things to start unraveling. Within days, Karen received an official notice from the county court. She was being investigated for destruction of property and misuse of HOA funds. Apparently, during the city's deep dive into her actions, they discovered she had been funneling HOA money for personal expenses, including fancy dinners, vacations, and suspiciously expensive home renovations. The fallout was immediate. The HOA board, realizing the storm that was about to hit, held an emergency meeting. Karen was removed as president by unanimous vote. Her supporters tried to protest, but at this point, she had become too much of a liability. Karen, refusing to go down quietly, tried to hold a press conference in her driveway. It did not go well. A few news crews showed up, but instead of giving her the platform she wanted, they grilled her with questions about the financial scandal and her abuses of power. The interview went viral almost instantly. Clips of Karen stumbling over her words, trying to justify her actions, and ultimately storming away in frustration flooded social media. The internet dubbed her Helipad Karen, and within hours, memes were everywhere. Jake watched it all unfold with a bag of popcorn. A week later, Karen put her house up for sale. The once all-powerful HOA queen had been dethroned. Her loyalists, now leaderless, scattered like cockroaches. Without her constant interference, the neighborhood started to relax. People began painting their houses the colors they actually wanted. Driveways were no longer under strict parking surveillance. Even the fines for grass being too tall mysteriously stopped appearing. Jake, despite everything, decided to keep the helipad. Not because he needed it, but because it was a symbol. A reminder that sometimes the best way to deal with petty tyranny is to outthink it. One evening, as he sat on his porch, sipping his coffee, the new HOA president, a much more reasonable man named Tom, walked over. "I just wanted to say," Tom said, leaning on the railing, "you did the neighborhood a favor." Jake smirked. "Glad to hear it." Tom chuckled. "Also, just out of curiosity, are you actually planning to land another helicopter?" Jake thought about it for a moment, then grinned. "Maybe. Just to keep things interesting." Tom laughed and shook his head. "Well, if you do, let me know. I want a front row seat." As Tom walked away, Jake leaned back in his chair, looking up at the sky. The war was over. Karen was gone. The neighborhood was finally peaceful. And the best part? He never had to worry about someone blocking his driveway again.